OJ Simpson's daughter has never confirmed anything, and that silence is the most disturbing detail of all. Born in 1985, Sydney Brooke Simpson was 8 years old on June 12, 1994, the night her mother was murdered, and she has remained publicly silent for more than 3 decades while the world argued in her place. This story is not about what she said, it is about what her silence, her choices, and her disappearance from public life quietly reveal, piece by piece. The night of June 12, 1994 cut Sydney Brooke Simpson's life in half. Before it, she was a child born in 1985, living an ordinary life with routines that felt permanent. After it, the world became louder, brighter, and impossible to understand in the way a child needs it to be. To the public, the location on South Bundy Drive in Brentwood quickly became a crime scene. To Sydney, it was the place where her mother, Nicole Brown Simpson, did not come home. There was no explanation that made sense to an 8-year-old. No warning. No transition. Only the sudden absence of someone who had defined safety, rhythm, and familiarity. That same night, Ronald Goldman was also killed near the front of the house. Within hours, 2 private lives were transformed into names repeated endlessly on television. Sydney was 8 years old. Her younger brother Justin was 5. They were too young to grasp the language being used around them, but old enough to feel fear in the pauses between conversations. Adults spoke in lowered voices. Doors were closed more often than usual. Telephone calls came and went without context. The house no longer felt predictable. Questions were answered with silence or gentle deflection. Details were removed before the children could reach them. In the days that followed, the story escaped the neighborhood and spread across the country. News vans lined the streets. Cameras stayed on for hours at a time. Reporters searched for movement behind windows and gates. What had been a family crisis became a national fixation. The intensity did not slow down. It multiplied. For Sydney and her brother, this was the moment when the outside world began to intrude on a space that was already fragile. Sydney was not shown on screen. There were no images of her reacting, no statements attributed to her. That absence was deliberate, but it was not her decision. Lawyers, guardians, and family members acted quickly to remove the children from view. Protection took the form of distance. Silence became a rule rather than a choice. The goal was simple and urgent: keep the children out of the story, even as the story consumed everything around them. Inside that protected space, the night of June 12 existed as fragmented memory. Sounds without clear meaning. Tension without explanation. A sense that something irreversible had occurred. No one asked Sydney to describe what she felt. No one expected her to understand what adults were debating on television. Her role was passive. To wait. To be moved from place to place. To adapt without information. There is no need to describe what happened beyond the closed doors that night. The facts belong to court records and headlines. What matters here is what followed. From that moment forward, Sydney's childhood was permanently altered. Her mother was gone. Normal routines disappeared. Trust and stability was broken early. While the world argued about responsibility and truth, Sydney entered a different reality, one defined by caution, supervision, and enforced quiet. From that night on, silence was not an absence. It was the condition under which she continued to grow. The story stopped belonging to the family and began belonging to the country. Within days, television networks turned the case into a continuous broadcast. Helicopters hovered above highways. News anchors repeated the same images and phrases from morning until night. What had happened inside one household was no longer private. It became a national spectacle shaped by cameras, headlines, and legal language. When the white Ford Bronco appeared on live television during the highway pursuit in mid-June 1994, the attention reached a level never seen before. Millions watched in real time as law enforcement followed the vehicle across Southern California. For viewers, it was dramatic and unprecedented. For the children connected to the name at the center of the screen, it was something else entirely. They were hidden from view, moved quietly between safe locations, shielded from questions they were not allowed to answer and emotions they were not expected to show. Sydney Brooke Simpson did not appear on camera. Her brother did not speak. No microphones were placed in front of them. This absence was not accidental. Lawyers, guardians, and family members agreed on one priority: the children would not participate in the public narrative. Decisions were made without their input. Statements were issued without their voices. Silence became part of a legal strategy as much as an act of protection. As the criminal trial began in early 1995, the separation grew wider. Courtroom sketches, witness testimonies, and expert opinions dominated the news cycle. Every detail was examined, debated, and replayed. The case divided the public and reshaped conversations about justice, race, and media power. Yet the two children at the center of the family were never asked how this attention affected them. Their experiences were considered irrelevant to the larger story unfolding on television. Inside private spaces, life continued under strict supervision. Schedules were controlled. Access to news was limited. Conversations were filtered. Adults spoke about the case in careful terms or avoided it altogether. The children learned quickly which questions were unwelcome and which topics led to silence. They adapted by observing rather than speaking. By listening rather than responding. When the verdict was announced in early October 1995, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Crowds gathered. Commentators analyzed every possible implication. For the public, the trial had reached a conclusion. For Sydney, nothing was resolved. The noise did not end. It simply changed shape. Legal outcomes did not restore what had been lost. They did not explain what a child was supposed to do with conflicting narratives and constant attention. Throughout this period, Sydney remained absent from the official record. No interviews. No public statements. No visible reaction to moments that defined a generation of television viewers. That absence carried weight. It signaled that the story moving across screens was not hers to tell. Others spoke in her place. Others decided what mattered and what did not. By the end of 1995, the world believed it had witnessed the full story. In reality, it had only seen what power, media, and the legal system allowed it to see. The children were still there, growing older in the background, learning that survival required distance. Their silence was not a mystery. It was a condition imposed by a world that had already decided how the story would be told. From the middle of the 1990s onward, Sydney Brooke Simpson and her younger brother were removed from public view. This was not gradual. It happened quickly and deliberately. Guardianship arrangements were put in place. Daily routines were reshaped around protection rather than freedom. The goal was clear. The children were not to be seen, not to be quoted, and not to become part of the spectacle that surrounded their family name. They lived under supervision that most children never experience. Movement was planned. Social contact was filtered. School environments were chosen for discretion rather than convenience. Adults around them learned to anticipate attention and deflect it before it reached the children. Privacy was treated as something fragile that could collapse at any moment. Silence became the safest form of behavior. Sydney did not speak to reporters. She did not appear in front of cameras. She did not participate in documentaries or televised retrospectives that revisited the case year after year. While other figures associated with the story offered opinions, memories, and interpretations, she remained absent. This absence was consistent. It did not change with time. It did not soften as she grew older. It became a defining feature of her public identity. Media outlets continued to search for access. Photographers waited outside gates. Headlines speculated about how the children were coping. Yet no statements came from Sydney. No corrections were issued. No clarifications were offered. Even when misinformation circulated, silence held. The decision was not framed as dignity or restraint. It was simply how survival was managed. For a child growing into adolescence under these conditions, silence carried consequences. It meant learning early that speech could be dangerous. It meant understanding that curiosity from others was not harmless. It meant recognizing that any visible reaction could be interpreted, twisted, or used as confirmation of someone else's narrative. Remaining quiet was not passive. It required constant awareness. Sydney learned to exist without explaining herself. Teachers, peers, and acquaintances were rarely given context. Her last name carried weight, but her personal story remained inaccessible. This separation created distance. It also created isolation. Silence protected her from intrusion, but it also limited connection. Relationships formed carefully. Trust developed slowly. Justin followed a similar path. The siblings shared an understanding that was never articulated publicly. They moved through the world knowing that their experiences were not theirs to define in public terms. Adults continued to decide what was appropriate to say and what was not. This pattern persisted through the late 1990s and into the next decade. There were opportunities to speak. As interest in the case resurfaced through books, films, and anniversary coverage, invitations appeared. They were declined. Not with statements. Not with explanations. Simply with continued absence. Each refusal reinforced a message that had been established early. The children would not participate. This long period of silence functioned as a form of confirmation. Not of legal responsibility or factual detail, but of emotional reality. It signaled that the cost of speaking was higher than the benefit. It showed that remaining unseen was not avoidance, but preservation. Silence was not chosen because it was easier. It was chosen because it was necessary. By the end of the 1990s, Sydney was no longer a small child, yet her position had not changed. She did not emerge to reinterpret the past. She did not attempt to control the narrative. She did not challenge the versions of events debated on television. Her life continued outside the frame. This absence endured while the world revisited the case again and again. Each revisit brought renewed attention, renewed speculation, and renewed attempts to locate her voice. Each time, there was nothing. No participation. No commentary. No reaction. What remained was a pattern so consistent that it became meaningful in itself. Silence, over time, stopped looking like a temporary response to trauma. It became a permanent condition. It defined how Sydney navigated adulthood. It shaped how she related to the past. It was not an empty space. It was an active boundary. In a story driven by noise, repetition, and exposure, her refusal to speak stood as the clearest signal of all. Sydney Brooke Simpson entered adulthood by moving in the opposite direction of attention. As the new century began, she did not attempt to redefine her family story. She did not seek sympathy, explanation, or understanding from the public. Instead, she narrowed her life. Privacy became intentional. Distance became routine. She chose a way of living that avoided visibility. Her name appeared rarely, and when it did, it carried no commentary. She did not write a memoir. She did not participate in televised conversations about the case that had defined an era. She did not allow herself to be positioned as a witness, a survivor, or a symbol. These roles were available. She refused them all by doing nothing. Education and work were handled quietly. No interviews announced her choices. No profiles followed her path. She did not leverage curiosity into opportunity. In a culture that rewards exposure, she treated exposure as a threat. Every step away from the spotlight reinforced a single pattern. She would not be part of the public narrative. This withdrawal was not accidental. It required discipline. It required saying no repeatedly, without explanation. Media interest did not disappear after the trial years. It resurfaced with anniversaries, documentaries, and renewed debates. Each return of attention created another moment where silence had to be maintained. She never broke it. Sydney did not correct stories written about her family. She did not challenge accusations. She did not issue statements of defense or denial. This absence was noted, even if it was rarely discussed directly. Silence removed her from the argument entirely. It placed her outside the camps that formed around loyalty and opposition. Her relationship to her father's public image remained undefined by words. She did not appear beside him in moments designed to show unity. She did not stand forward to protect his reputation. At the same time, she did not publicly reject him. There was no performance of forgiveness and no performance of condemnation. What remained was distance. For someone growing up under an infamous name, this approach carried cost. Silence limited her ability to control how others perceived her. It allowed speculation to continue unchecked. Yet it also preserved something else. It preserved autonomy. By refusing to speak, She refused to be interpreted through a single sentence or reaction. She could not be quoted out of context if she never offered context at all. Social connections were shaped by this reality. Trust was built slowly. Personal history was not shared easily. Many people knew her name before they knew her. She learned to manage that imbalance by offering as little as possible. Her past remained hers, even if others believed it belonged to them. Throughout these years, the public continued to revisit the case with renewed intensity. Films were released. Books were published. Opinions hardened. Narratives were simplified. None of this changed her position. She did not emerge to adjust the story or soften its edges. Her absence became consistent enough to feel deliberate. This pattern functioned as an indirect confirmation of something deeper. Not of legal guilt or innocence, but of damage. It showed that the story left behind was not something to be reclaimed. It was something to be avoided. The refusal to engage suggested that participation itself carried harm. Sydney's life during this period did not offer resolution to the public. It offered no dramatic turning point. Instead, it demonstrated endurance. Growing up without escape did not mean constant fear. It meant constant calculation. What to share? Where to go? How to remain unremarkable? The truth did not arrive through testimony or confession. It appeared through absence. Through a life shaped around avoidance rather than explanation. As the years passed, that absence accumulated meaning. It suggested that what happened could not be safely revisited. Not publicly. Not even indirectly. By the middle of the next decade, the pattern was unmistakable. Sydney Brooke Simpson had not reclaimed her story because she had never given it away. The public conversation moved on without her. She stayed behind the boundary she had drawn early. In a narrative built on exposure, her disappearance remained the most consistent signal of all. Sydney Brooke Simpson never staged a moment of reconciliation in public. There was no photograph released to suggest unity. No appearance designed to soften perception. No carefully worded sentence offered to reassure an audience that wanted closure. The absence was consistent and sustained. She did not stand beside her father in moments that were clearly intended to signal family support. When cameras searched for familiar faces, hers was not there. When statements were issued by others, her name was not attached. Silence remained intact even when speaking would have been simple and widely accepted. There were many opportunities to intervene. Years passed in which public opinion shifted back and forth. Narratives hardened, then fractured. Each shift created a new invitation for response. A single sentence could have altered perception. A single appearance could have reframed loyalty. None came. Sydney did not deny accusations publicly. She did not defend character. She did not explain her distance. This refusal did not look accidental. It was steady, measured, and unbroken. In a culture that often interprets silence as weakness, her silence functioned as control. Family images were not shared. There were no interviews recalling private moments meant to humanize or redeem. No effort was made to present an alternative story of domestic harmony. The usual tools of reputation management were never used. That choice carried meaning. Observers often assumed silence implied confusion or indecision. Over time, it became clear that neither applied. The pattern held too firmly. Silence did not fluctuate with public pressure. It did not soften with age. It did not crack under sympathy or outrage. It remained the same. Sydney had every reason to speak if her goal had been repair. Public sympathy for children connected to tragedy is powerful. Support would have followed. Yet she declined the role entirely. She did not allow herself to be framed as a bridge between opposing sides. She stayed outside the conflict. This distance did not require public explanation. It communicated through consistency. By never stepping forward, she removed herself from interpretation. Others could argue, defend, accuse, or forgive. She did none of it. Her position was defined by what she refused to do. The lack of reconciliation was not dramatic. It did not arrive with confrontation or declaration. It unfolded quietly through years of non-participation. Silence became the final form of engagement. Not an emotional reaction, but a boundary. This was the last confrontation. Not a meeting, not a statement, not a televised exchange. It was a decision made repeatedly over time. To face the world without addressing it. To let public narratives continue without interference. To remain unseen even when visibility was offered. In that choice, something settled. Not resolution, but clarity. Sydney Brooke Simpson did not confront the story directly. She confronted it by refusing to enter it at all. Silence, held long enough, became the only response left standing. Court records became the loudest voice in the story. In the late 1990s, a civil jury reached a conclusion that did not rely on television panels or public debate. Responsibility was assigned in a courtroom, not a studio. Financial damages were ordered in favor of the victims' families. The judgment existed on paper, signed and filed, independent of opinion. Sydney Brooke Simpson did not challenge that outcome. There was no public objection issued on her behalf. No legal maneuver announced to contest the finding. No appearance made to question the authority of the civil process. The ruling stood without resistance from the children most closely connected to the defendant. The damages were substantial and widely reported. The figure was discussed in newsrooms and legal circles, analyzed for its implications. Yet the response from the family side remained unchanged. Silence continued. No statements were released to dispute responsibility. No press conferences were organized to frame the decision as unjust. The absence was consistent with everything that had come before. During the years that followed, enforcement actions and collection efforts unfolded within the legal system. Liens, filings, and procedural motions appeared in public records. These developments attracted periodic attention. Each time the case resurfaced in legal news, the same pattern repeated. Sydney did not step forward. She did not align herself publicly with arguments seeking relief from civil responsibility. There were opportunities to intervene indirectly. Legal representatives could have issued comments emphasizing family disagreement with the verdict. Public sympathy could have been requested. The narrative could have been softened through selective statements. None of this happened. The paperwork advanced without a counter-narrative from the children. This restraint carried significance. In cases involving public figures, family members often play a visible role in defending reputation or contesting outcomes. Here, that role was left empty. The silence did not fluctuate with financial pressure or renewed media interest. It remained firm across years of litigation and appeal discussions. Sydney did not use her position to influence perception. She did not appear as a moral shield. She did not speak as a daughter challenging the legitimacy of civil accountability. Her name did not appear in filings seeking to reverse or undermine the judgment. The legal record moved forward without her participation. The absence of opposition functioned as a form of acknowledgement without words. Not an admission of facts, and not a declaration of belief, but an acceptance of process. The court had spoken. The documents stood. There was no effort to recast responsibility through public emotion or familial loyalty. As the years progressed into the following decade, the civil judgment continued to shape outcomes. Financial obligations were enforced. Assets were addressed through lawful means. These actions were procedural and impersonal. They did not invite commentary from those outside the legal framework. Sydney remained outside by choice. When attention returned through retrospectives and renewed debates, the civil record remained unchanged. It was cited as a counterweight to the criminal verdict. Analysts pointed to it as evidence of accountability achieved through a different standard. Throughout these discussions, Sydney's position was unchanged. She neither endorsed nor attacked the narrative built around the documents. She allowed the documents to speak alone. This approach contrasted sharply with the surrounding noise. Commentators argued about meaning. Supporters and critics rehearsed familiar positions. The legal papers remained fixed. They required no interpretation from a daughter who had never asked to be part of the argument. By the mid-2000s and into the following years, the pattern had settled. The civil judgment was part of the permanent record. Enforcement continued according to law. No family campaign emerged to rewrite its significance. The children did not become advocates for reversal. They did not present themselves as injured parties within the civil dispute. In this context, confirmation did not arrive as testimony or confession. It arrived as non-interference. By not contesting civil responsibility, Sydney allowed the legal outcome to remain intact. She did not shield her father from consequence through public alignment. She did not use her identity to dilute the authority of the court. Paper replaced speech. Filings replaced interviews. Orders replaced explanations. The story advanced through stamps, signatures, and dates rather than voices. This was the point where the record became complete without participation from those most closely watched. Documents do not argue. They persist. In this case, they carried the weight that words never did. Through years of legal action, Sydney Brooke Simpson remained absent, and that absence allowed the civil record to stand without challenge. The truth did not need to be announced. It was recorded, enforced, and left in place. Sydney Simpson lives outside public view. Her daily life does not intersect with cameras, interviews, or public debate. She keeps her distance from attention and maintains a routine built around privacy rather than recognition. Nothing about her present life appears designed to answer questions from the past. She does not speak about her father. His name does not appear in statements or recollections attributed to her. She does not revisit the case that defined her childhood. There are no public reflections, no anniversaries marked with words, no attempts to reframe memory. The silence that began in childhood continues without interruption. Her work and personal choices remain largely unannounced. When references appear, they are minimal and factual. There is no effort to turn history into identity. No attempt to transform trauma into narrative. She does not seek sympathy or understanding through explanation. She chooses absence instead. This restraint is consistent. It does not change with renewed media interest or cultural re-evaluation. As discussions resurface and opinions harden, her position remains unchanged. She does not offer forgiveness in public language. She does not defend reputation through speech. She does not deny or confirm competing interpretations. She allows the conversation to proceed without her. In many stories shaped by notoriety, time brings a reversal. Silence gives way to confession. Distance gives way to reflection. That moment never arrives here. Years pass without deviation. The boundary holds. This choice carries meaning precisely because it is sustained. Silence maintained over decades becomes a form of communication. It does not declare innocence or assign blame. It does not resolve contradiction. It simply refuses participation. The public often expects a voice to emerge, a sentence that clarifies everything. None comes. What remains is a life lived beyond commentary. A refusal to turn personal history into public property. When a daughter never speaks, never defends, never corrects the story, the question does not fade. It sharpens. Is that silence still neutral, or does it reveal more than words ever could?